Hold on. Before I start this one, I need you to sit down. What you're about to hear is the story of a kid whose parents gave his twin brother, his 15-year-old twin brother, full control over what he was allowed to eat. Every meal, every snack, every single day for 14 months. Nobody stopped it until this kid collapsed in a school cafeteria weighing 109 pounds. His own family turned food into a weapon and handed the trigger to a teenager. What happened after that collapse? Justice. Real, ugly, court-documented justice. And honestly, this guy handled it with more composure at 15 than most grown men would at 40. Let's get into it. My parents let my twin brother decide what I could eat. For 14 months, he starved me. Then the school nurse made one phone call and my whole family went down. I woke up on the cafeteria floor with the school nurse, Mrs. Ortiz, kneeling over me asking if I could hear her. My vision was blurry around the edges, and my mouth tasted like pennies. The lights above were way too bright, making my head pound in rhythm with my heartbeat. She was holding my wrist, checking my pulse, and I could see her lips moving, but the words took a couple seconds to actually register. Nate, can you tell me when you last ate? Should have been a simple question. It wasn't. Breakfast had been half a piece of dry toast, because Kyle said I'd been looking bloated and needed to cut back on carbs. Lunch was supposed to be in 10 minutes, but I'd have to show Kyle my tray first, and he'd decide what I could actually eat. That's how it had worked for the past 14 months. Ever since my parents set up what they called the meal approval system, after I supposedly ate Kyle's birthday cake slice without permission. I'd been a normal 15-year-old kid before the rule started. 5'9", 153 pounds, on the JV soccer team with a decent shot at varsity next year. I was identical to Kyle in almost every way. Same dark hair, green eyes, same lean build, same face that made people do double takes when they saw us together. We'd spent our whole lives being compared and treated like a match set, but that was before our parents decided Kyle's judgment about food was more reliable than mine. Before they gave him complete control over what I could eat each day, portion by portion, meal by meal. Before I started disappearing inside my own body, while my twin decided whether I deserved protein or vegetables or anything more than whatever scraps he felt like approving. Mrs. Ortiz helped me sit up, and I saw the crowd of students that had gathered, phones out, filming my collapse like it was content. She waved them off and called for the vice principal. My hands were shaking, which had become normal lately. Low blood sugar, probably. Kyle had approved oatmeal for breakfast yesterday, but only 3 spoonfuls because he said I hadn't done enough chores to earn a full bowl. Dinner the night before had been plain salad. No dressing, no protein, because apparently I'd been rude to him and needed to learn respect. The system my parents created meant every meal required Kyle's approval, and his approval came with conditions, restrictions, and punishments that had nothing to do with nutrition and everything to do with power. Mrs. Ortiz took my blood pressure and frowned. She asked again when I'd last eaten a full meal. I couldn't remember. Maybe 3 days ago. Maybe longer. Time had started blurring together, and I'd stopped keeping track of things like adequate calories. Those concepts belonged to a different version of my life. She told me to stay put while she made a phone call. I heard her say words like severely underweight and possible malnutrition, and need immediate evaluation. The backstory was almost boring in how stupid it was. 14 months earlier, my parents threw a birthday party for Kyle and me. We'd turned 14. Mom ordered this fancy cake from an expensive bakery, chocolate with raspberry filling and cream cheese frosting. The party was mostly Kyle's friends because he was more social. The twin everyone gravitated toward, while I was quieter and less interesting. At some point during the party, a slice went missing. Kyle's slice specifically, the corner piece he'd claimed before the official cutting. He'd set it aside to eat later, and when he went back for it, the plate was empty. He immediately accused me, said I ate his special piece because I was jealous the party was really more his than mine. I hadn't eaten the cake. I'd been outside playing soccer with some kids when it disappeared. But Kyle was convinced, and when he told our parents, they believed him instantly. Mom looked at me with this disappointed face and asked why I couldn't just let my brother have one thing. Dad lectured me about respect and boundaries, how eating Kyle's cake showed a fundamental problem with my impulse control. Didn't matter how much I said I hadn't touched it. Their minds were made up. The punishment they invented was creative in the worst possible way. Since I apparently couldn't be trusted around food, since I had poor judgment about what belonged to me, Kyle would approve all my meals going forward, just until I learned self-control, just until I could be trusted again. That had been 14 months ago. The temporary punishment became permanent, then expanded, then weaponized. Kyle started small, checking my school lunch to make sure I hadn't packed anything he thought I didn't deserve. Then it grew to approving breakfast, then dinner, then snacks, then controlling not just what I ate, but how much, when, and under what conditions. Here's what a typical day looked like by month 8 or 9. I'd wake up and go downstairs. Kyle would already be eating whatever he wanted: cereal, eggs, toast, juice. I'd stand there and wait. He'd look at my homework from the night before. If he decided I'd done a good enough job, I'd get oatmeal. Plain. Measured out by him. If he was in a bad mood or I'd annoyed him the day before, I'd get nothing. Just water. Then at school, I'd have to find him before lunch and show him my tray. He'd remove things. The chicken? Nah, too much protein, you haven't earned it. The roll? No carbs today. Sometimes I'd end up eating just a side salad and an apple. Sometimes less. Dinner was the same routine. He'd tell our parents what I was allowed to have, and they'd plate it accordingly, like it was normal, like this was just how our house worked. I remember one Thursday. It was a Thursday because we had soccer practice that afternoon, and I almost passed out during sprints. Kyle had restricted me to vegetables only for the entire week because I'd left a dish in the sink overnight. 5 days of raw vegetables and the occasional handful of plain rice. I was running drills at practice, and my legs just gave out underneath me. Coach asked if I was okay, and I said I'd skipped lunch, which was technically true. I just didn't mention the part where my brother had decided I didn't get one. My parents enabled every single escalation, praising Kyle for taking his responsibility seriously, for helping me learn discipline. Mom would say things like, "Kyle's really stepped up at dinner," while I sat there with a plate of plain lettuce. Dad would nod approvingly. They ignored every sign, every pound I lost, every time I asked for more food and got told I was being dramatic. Yo, time out. I need everybody to understand what just happened here. These parents, actual adult human beings, looked at a missing slice of birthday cake and went, "You know what the appropriate response is? Let's give our other 14-year-old son complete dictatorial control over his twin's food supply. Indefinitely." That's not parenting. That's a psychological experiment you'd get kicked out of a university for proposing. This is like if the warden from Shawshank Redemption had a kid and said, "Let me try this at home." And the kid was 14. They handed a teenager the keys to another human being's survival and called it a learning opportunity. Buckle up, because this ride only goes downhill from here. Mrs. Ortiz came back with the vice principal, Mr. Donnelly, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked genuinely concerned. They walked me to the nurse's office, one on each side like I might drop again. She had me stand on a scale and I watched the digital numbers settle at 109 pounds. I'd lost 44 pounds in 14 months. She measured my height, still 5'9", and I saw her calculate my BMI on her computer. Her face went pale. "Nate, I'm calling your parents, and I'm also calling your pediatrician. This is a medical emergency." The words hit hard. Emergency meant hospital. Hospital meant Kyle's system getting exposed. My phone buzzed, and I knew without looking it was Kyle. He always knew when something was happening with me. 3 texts. "Why weren't you in English? Someone said you passed out in the cafeteria. You better not be making a scene. Mom and Dad are going to be angry if you're being dramatic again." I put the phone face down on the table and felt my hands shaking harder. Mrs. Ortiz noticed and brought me a juice box and a granola bar. I opened the granola bar but hesitated before taking a bite. Kyle hadn't approved this. He'd specifically said no sugary snacks this week because I'd gotten a B on a math test. Eating without permission meant consequences. Mrs. Ortiz saw me hesitate, and her expression shifted to something between confusion and alarm. She told me to eat it right now, her voice sharp. I took a bite, and the sweetness was almost overwhelming after days of bland, restricted portions. My stomach cramped immediately, not used to actual food. She asked about my comment. Apparently, I'd said something out loud about checking with my brother first. I hadn't realized I'd said it. The words just slipped out. I wanted to lie, protect the secret that had become my entire existence. But I was so tired of being hungry, of calculating every bite, of living in fear of Kyle's approval. My parents let Kyle decide what I can eat. It started as a punishment 14 months ago. It never stopped. Mrs. Ortiz's face went through several expressions before landing on professional concern. She closed her office door, sat across from me, and said something nobody had ever said to me before. Nate, what you're describing is abuse. What your parents are doing is neglect. What your brother is doing is controlling and harmful. This isn't discipline. This is systematic starvation by someone who has no medical training and no right to make these decisions. I'd never heard it put that plainly. Abuse, neglect, starvation. The words made it real, in a way it hadn't been when it was just my daily life. She told me she was legally required to report it, that she was calling Child Protective Services right now. Hold on a second. For the listeners, this is me, not Nate. This kid hesitated to eat a granola bar during a medical emergency because his brother hadn't approved it. His body is literally shutting down, and his first instinct is still to follow the rules his 15-year-old twin set up. That's not discipline. That's programming. Kyle didn't just control Nate's food. He rewired this kid's survival instincts, turned basic hunger into a permission slip. And the parents watched this happen for over a year and said, yeah, Kyle's doing great. If bad parenting was a video game, these two just unlocked the final boss. Anyway, Mom shows up next, and she makes it worse. The call to my parents went about how I expected. Mom arrived 30 minutes later in her real estate clothes, looking annoyed at being pulled from work. She came in already defensive, asking what stories I'd been making up now, saying I'd always been dramatic when I wanted attention. Mrs. Ortiz stood up and laid it out. Your son collapsed from what appears to be severe malnutrition. His BMI is critically low. He's lost over 40 pounds in the past year. This isn't dramatic. This is a medical crisis. Mom's face went red. She insisted I ate plenty, said I'd just been exercising more, getting healthy, that Kyle had been helping me make better food choices. Mrs. Ortiz pulled out a chart she'd been compiling. Growth measurements from my annual school physicals going back 5 years. Steady growth through middle school, then a sharp cliff starting exactly 14 months ago. This isn't healthy weight loss. This is starvation. Mom's expression shifted from annoyed to defensive, to something that looked almost like fear. But she doubled down. Said Kyle was responsible and had excellent self-control. That they trusted his assessment of what I needed. My pediatrician, Dr. Kessler, arrived an hour later. She'd been my doctor since I was 3. A calm woman with silver-streaked hair who'd given me every vaccine and treated every childhood illness with patient efficiency. She took one look at me and her professional mask cracked. She did a quick exam right there in the nurse's office. Heart rate, blood pressure, skin, nails, hair. Each observation made her expression darker. She turned to my mother and told her to take me to the hospital immediately, that she was concerned about organ damage. Mom crossed her arms and said everyone was overreacting. Dr. Kessler pulled up my growth chart on her tablet. 5 years of checkups showing normal, consistent weight through age 13, then a straight drop starting 14 months ago. She zoomed in. His last recorded visit was 13 months ago at 151 pounds. Perfectly healthy. Now he's 109. That's a 28% loss of body weight. In medical terms, that's starvation. Mom's face had gone from defensive to white. But Kyle said Nate needed to cut back. He said Nate was eating too much. Dr. Kessler's expression went hard. Kyle is a 15-year-old child with no medical training. He's not qualified to make nutritional assessments for anyone. What you've allowed to happen borders on criminal neglect. Wait. Let me jump in. The mother just watched a doctor explain her son is being starved to death, and her response was, "But Kyle said he needed to cut back." Ma'am, Kyle is 15. He can't drive a car, vote, or buy a rated R movie ticket, but you gave him authority over another human being's caloric intake? That's like putting a toddler in charge of air traffic control and blaming the planes when they crash. And she canceled medical checkups, so no doctor would notice. That's not ignorance. That's a cover-up. The mom from Matilda is watching this like, even I wouldn't do that. Popcorn ready because CPS is about to walk through that door. The CPS worker arrived at 2:47. A woman named Linda Torres, who'd been doing child welfare investigations for 11 years. She pulled me into a private room and asked me to tell her everything from the beginning. I walked her through all of it. The birthday cake, the initial punishment, how it escalated over 14 months, Kyle's rules. No breakfast without completing all homework first. No lunch without Kyle approving my outfit that morning. No dinner without finishing all chores to his satisfaction. No snacks unless I'd earned them through good behavior, which was defined entirely by whatever mood Kyle happened to be in. I told her about the portions getting smaller, the rules getting stricter, how Kyle started denying me protein because he said I didn't need to build muscle, how he'd restricted me to mostly vegetables and occasional grains, how some days I got nothing because I disappointed him in some vague way I couldn't even identify. Linda took notes in a leather-bound notebook. When I finished, she asked one question that broke something open inside me. Nate, do your parents know the full extent of what Kyle has been doing? I thought about it honestly. I think they know I'm hungry. But they see it as Kyle being responsible, as me learning a lesson. When I try to tell them I'm starving, they say I'm being dramatic, that Kyle knows best. She closed her notebook and looked at me directly. Nate, I'm placing you in emergency protective custody, as of right now. You won't be going home tonight. The relief was so intense it made me dizzy. Not going home. Not facing Kyle. Not having to ask permission for dinner. I sat there in that little conference room and felt something I hadn't felt in over a year. Like maybe things could actually get better. It sounds dumb saying it now, but when you've been inside something that bad for that long, you forget that getting out is even an option. Your world shrinks down to just surviving the next meal decision. The hospital was a blur of tests and concerned faces. They drew blood, took x-rays, did an EKG to check my heart. Each test revealed more damage. Blood work showed anemia, vitamin deficiencies, electrolyte imbalances. X-rays showed decreased bone density for my age. The EKG showed an irregular heartbeat, consistent with malnutrition. Dr. Kessler compiled everything into a report for CPS and the district attorney's office. Nate, your body is eating itself to survive. Your muscle mass is depleted, your bone density is that of someone much older, and your organs are under severe stress. If this had continued much longer, you could have had heart failure or kidney damage. You could have died. The words should have scared me, but I mostly felt numb. I'd been dying for 14 months, just slowly enough that I hadn't realized it was happening. They admitted me for 3 days of nutritional rehabilitation. Refeeding someone who's been starved requires careful supervision. Introducing food too quickly can cause dangerous electrolyte shifts that can actually be fatal. So they put me on a controlled meal plan, small portions every few hours, each one monitored by nurses who documented what I ate and how my body responded. The first real meal I had without Kyle's approval was chicken broth and crackers, and I cried while eating it because nobody told me I couldn't. The nurse on duty, a young guy named Joel, sat with me and let me cry without asking questions. Later, he told me he'd worked in the pediatric unit for 6 years and had seen his share of bad situations. But something about mine hit different. Brothers aren't supposed to do that to each other, he said, and parents aren't supposed to let it happen. My parents tried to visit on the second day. Hospital security stopped them. Linda had put a protection order in place. I watched from my window as they argued with the security guard in the parking lot. Mom gesturing angrily, Dad on his phone probably calling lawyers. Kyle wasn't with them, and I wondered what he was thinking. Whether he felt guilty or justified or nothing at all. My phone had been taken by CPS as evidence. All the texts from Kyle documenting his control. All the conversations where he denied me food or set impossible conditions for earning meals. Linda said the messages alone were damning. Okay, stop. This detail is wild. CPS took Nate's phone as evidence, right? But Kyle also kept his own records. A whole notebook. Handwritten. Every meal approved or denied. Every punishment. Every restriction. Dated and detailed. This kid was running a dictatorship and journaling about it like a Bond villain with a day planner. October 22nd, Nate complained about being hungry. Added 2 additional days to restriction as consequence for whining. B-row. You wrote that down in your own handwriting and handed it to investigators. That's not a confession. That's a resume for a job nobody's hiring for. If self-incrimination was an art form, Kyle just painted the Mona Lisa and signed it. Moving on. Linda also interviewed Kyle. According to her notes, he'd shown zero remorse. Defended every decision. Insisted I'd needed strict control because I was impulsive and undisciplined. His notebook, that handwritten record of every meal he'd approved or denied, was entered as evidence. Dr. Kessler submitted her medical report to CPS and copied the district attorney's office. She'd consulted with a pediatric nutritionist, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, who reviewed my case and confirmed that no reasonable person with access to food would lose that much weight voluntarily. Dr. Tanaka estimated I'd been consuming somewhere between 800 and 1,200 calories daily, less than half what a growing teenage boy needs. She'd written in her supplemental report that the level of restriction over 14 months constituted torture. Criminal charges came 6 weeks after my collapse. The district attorney, Patricia Landry, filed charges against both my parents. Dad, Gerald Holloway, got 2 counts of child endangerment and 1 count of criminal neglect. Mom, Diane Holloway, got the same, plus an additional count of failure to protect, up to 5 years each. Kyle was charged in juvenile court with assault and battery, the legal theory being that systematic starvation constituted physical harm. The family CPS placed me with was a couple in their 40s named Greg and Wendy Carter, who'd been taking in teenagers for 8 years. They lived in a quiet neighborhood 30 minutes from my school, in a house that smelled like cooking and had a kitchen I could access whenever I wanted. Wendy sat me down the first night and explained their one rule about food. There were no rules about food. The fridge and pantry were open to me at all hours. I was supposed to eat when I was hungry and stop when I was full. That first week was surreal. I kept hovering near the kitchen during meals, waiting for permission that didn't need to be asked. Wendy started leaving sticky notes on the fridge. You don't need approval. Food isn't conditional. Trust your hunger. Greg, who worked from home as an accountant, would check in periodically. Not controlling, just concerned. It felt foreign after months of Kyle's regime. Actually, back up. I forgot to mention this part. My best friend Becca was the only person I'd texted from Wendy's phone during that first week. She'd heard rumors and showed up the next day with flowers and a container of homemade cookies. Said she'd known something was wrong, that I kept getting thinner and Kyle kept making weird comments about my diet. She should have said something sooner. I told her it wasn't her fault. Nobody expects a family to do what mine did. The trial was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled courtroom, formal, but not huge. My parents sat with their attorney, Richard Greenfield, some polished guy who'd built a career defending wealthy clients. Kyle sat separately with a court-appointed attorney who looked uncomfortable with her own client. Patricia called me to testify and my hands were shaking so bad I had to grip the railing. She walked me through everything chronologically. The cake, the punishment, the escalation, the specific rules, the physical effects. I answered every question directly. Greenfield's cross-examination tried to suggest I had an eating disorder, that I was attention-seeking, that Kyle was just trying to help me eat healthier. I shut each one down. Multiple doctors had evaluated me. No eating disorder. Weight loss entirely from external restriction. Dr. Kessler testified next and demolished the defense. Growth charts, blood work, bone density scans. She stated flat out that my condition was not self-inflicted. Greenfield tried arguing teenagers sometimes lose weight during growth spurts. Dr. Kessler didn't even blink. Growth spurts involve increased height, not decreased weight. Nate's height stayed the same while his weight plummeted. That's not development. That's starvation. Linda testified about the investigation and presented Kyle's notebook. She read entries aloud. August 15th, Nate was mouthy at breakfast, denied lunch. September 3rd, Nate got a B on his history test, restricted to vegetables only for 3 days. October 22nd, Nate complained about hunger, added 2 additional days to restriction. Each entry time-stamped in Kyle's own handwriting. The defense tried arguing Kyle acted under parental authority. The prosecution countered with evidence that my parents had actively enabled it. Canceled medical appointments to hide the weight loss, emails between them discussing my dramatic complaints about hunger, texts praising Kyle's discipline, and telling him to ignore my protests. Patricia read one email exchange between my parents out loud. Mom had written, "Nate's complaining again about portions," and Dad had responded, "Trust Kyle's judgment. He knows what Nate needs better than Nate does. The boy needs to stop fighting the system." The jury shifted in their seats when they heard that one. The prosecution's closing argument was sharp. Patricia stood in front of the jury and said these parents didn't accidentally neglect their son. They built a system of control. delegated it to a child, and then actively covered it up by canceling medical appointments and dismissing every warning sign. Nate lost 44 pounds. His heart was failing. His bones were deteriorating. And his parents' response to every cry for help was, "Trust Kyle." That's not a mistake. That's a choice they made every single day for 14 months. The jury deliberated 7 hours. When they came back, the verdict was read with a steady voice that filled the courtroom. Dad, guilty on all counts. Mom, guilty on all counts. Mom started sobbing. Dad sat there stone-faced. Kyle looked confused, like he genuinely couldn't understand why everyone was treating this as serious. Hold on. For the listeners, this is me one last time. I need to talk about Kyle's face when the verdicts dropped. Confused. Not scared, not guilty, not sorry. Confused. Like somebody told him water is wet and he's processing it. This kid documented 14 months of starving his twin, watched his brother collapse at 109 pounds, showed zero remorse to investigators, and when the jury said guilty, he looked around like, wait, I'm the bad guy? That's a kid who genuinely believed he had the right to control another human being's survival and is now experiencing the novel sensation of someone telling him no. Anyway, sentencing. And the judge was not playing. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. Judge Margaret Olson, 20 years on the bench, zero patience, handed down sentences harsher than even the prosecution had requested. Dad got 4 years in state prison. Mom got 5, due to her additional failure to protect charge. Both would complete mandatory parenting classes during incarceration. Upon release, 5 years probation with no contact with me unless I initiated it. Both placed on the state child abuse registry permanently. Judge Olson's voice was cold. You were entrusted with the care and protection of your children. You failed catastrophically, enabling one child to torture another for over a year. The harm you've caused is profound and potentially permanent. Kyle's juvenile case resulted in 18 months in a juvenile detention facility. His attorney argued for probation and community service, but the judge reviewed the evidence and determined detention was necessary. Kyle would finish high school through the facility's education program and carry a juvenile record. I wrote my own victim impact statement, read it aloud in court while my parents sat avoiding my eyes. I told them about the days I'd been so hungry I couldn't think straight in class. The nights lying awake with my stomach cramping, staring at the ceiling wondering if this was just my life now. The moment I realized my own family valued Kyle's control more than my survival. I told them they'd broken something fundamental, that I'd never trust the same way again. Final update. Physical recovery took about 18 months of careful nutritional rehab and medical monitoring. Dr. Kessler tracked my weight gain, celebrating each pound. I eventually stabilized around 155, close to my pre-starvation weight, but with composition changes that reflected the damage. Bone density improved but never fully recovered, meaning I'd deal with higher fracture risks for the rest of my life. My heart healed from the irregular rhythms, but Dr. Kessler warned me I'd need cardiac monitoring every couple years going forward. The physical scars were permanent, written into my body. The Carters officially adopted me 6 months after my removal, gave me stability, and a family that didn't make love conditional on obedience. Wendy taught me to cook, helped me rebuild a normal relationship with food, and relearn what hunger and fullness actually felt like without fear attached. Greg helped me prep for the SATs and supported my college applications. They showed me what healthy parenting looked like. It was the first time I'd seen it up close. The thing nobody tells you about recovering from something like this is how weird normal feels. For months, I couldn't sit down to eat without this knot in my stomach, waiting for someone to tell me I hadn't earned it. I'd open the fridge at midnight for a glass of water and freeze up, half expecting Kyle's voice to come from behind me asking what I thought I was doing. Wendy found me once standing in front of the open pantry at 2 in the morning, just staring at the food. Not eating, just making sure it was still there. She didn't say anything, just made me a sandwich and sat with me at the kitchen table while I ate it. I finished high school at a different school near the Carter's house. Fresh start where nobody knew my history. Made the varsity soccer team junior year, which felt like getting back a piece of myself that Kyle had taken. I wasn't the same player I'd been. My stamina was lower, my bones ached in ways they shouldn't at 16. But I was out there, running, eating whatever I wanted for dinner after practice. Nobody standing over my plate deciding if I'd been good enough. Went to a state university 4 hours away studying criminal justice. Actually, wait, I think I declared that sophomore year. Freshman year, I was undecided. Whatever, doesn't matter. I wanted to understand how the legal system could better protect kids in situations like mine. Graduated with honors. I never reconciled with my parents. They served their sentences and moved to a different state where nobody knew them. They sent letters occasionally, awkward attempts at connection that always avoided taking actual responsibility. I read them once each and filed them away. Not angry anymore, just not interested in pretending we could rebuild something that had been fundamentally broken. Some relationships don't deserve saving. The parent-child bond isn't sacred if the parents failed their most basic duty. Kyle tried reaching out years later. Sent an email through a mutual contact saying he finally understood the full impact of what he'd done. Said he was sorry, that sorry wasn't enough, but he wanted me to know. I read the email 3 times and deleted it without responding. I'd stopped needing his acknowledgement a long time ago. His apology felt more about his need for redemption than my need for closure. Some wounds heal without requiring the person who caused them to participate. I'd built a life that was mine, shaped by my choices, not their restrictions. And I decided a while back that's enough. One thing I still think about sometimes is that birthday cake, the slice that disappeared and started everything. I never found out who actually ate it, whether Kyle took it himself and blamed me, or some random party guest grabbed it without realizing the consequences. The truth of that initial incident mattered less than what my parents did in response. Even if I had eaten that cake, no punishment should give a teenager absolute power over his siblings' nutrition. No discipline should risk permanent physical damage or death. The most unfair punishment I ever got was my parents letting my twin decide what I was allowed to eat. 14 months of systematic starvation that permanently damaged my body. But I survived it, exposed it, and made sure the people responsible answered for every single day of it. So, what's the most unfair punishment you ever got growing up? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious. Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat this one. A kid lost 44 pounds because his parents decided a 15-year-old was qualified to run a nutrition program. When every warning sign was screaming in their face, they doubled down. Praised Kyle, canceled appointments, called their starving son dramatic. But here's what I respect about Nate. He didn't beg. He didn't try to win them back. He testified, watched the verdicts come in, and built a life without looking over his shoulder. Deleted Kyle's apology email without blinking. That's a man who knows what he's worth. Drop your thoughts below. What would you have done? And if you're not subscribed, hit that button so you don't miss the next one. So you don't miss the next one. So you don't miss the next one. So you don't miss the next one.